What is the scope of a variable? When I say scope, I am talking about accessibility. Can we access a variable inside of a function when the variable is defined outside? Can we access a variable from outside of a function when the variable is defined inside? So having a good understanding about scope of a variable, how we can access the variable inside and outside of a function when they are defined in different scopes will really help you to go code better and to avoid some of the errors. So watch the video till the end. In this video, we will be discussing different combination of scopes and different combination of accessibility of the variables inside and outside of a function. So watch the video till the end so that you can able to understand all of the combinations. So welcome to the series of everything you need to know about Python in simplest possible way. So let us first start this video with a global scope. So when I say global scope, the variable is defined outside of a function, outside of all the blocks, and can be accessed inside of any block. So let us start the code. So what I will be doing is that I will take a variable num, and for the time being I will be initializing the variable with 10. So I'm defining this inside outside of all the blocks, right? So I'm directly defining this. So now if I define a function here, let's say I'm taking the function name with just fun here. So instead of this function, what I will be doing is that I will just print this number here. So what I am doing is that I am having this number outside of this function, and I am printing this number inside of a function. So now if I call this function, first we need to call this function in order to execute this function, right? That is what I am doing. So I am defining this function. Now I am calling this function. So now if I execute this, so this is got executed, which means we can access this number even though this is initialized outside of a function, that we can see, right? So now what I will do is that I will define one more function here. Let's say I am taking the function which is fun1 here. So I inside of this fun1 also I am just printing this number. So now I will call this fun1 as well. So I am calling fun1. So now if I execute this, still we can able to access this number 10 even though this is defined outside of all the functions. So this is got clear, right? So this is what we call it as a global scope. This number is defined outside of all the function, but still we can able to access this number inside of any function. So you can see here we are accessing this number inside of fun1, and we can accessing this number inside of fun1 as well. So fun and fun1 as well. So like this, when the variable is defined outside of all the functions and all the blocks, we can able to access this number. So I hope you can able to understand. This is what we call global scope. This number can be accessed in any function and in any block. So this is about local global scope. Let us go ahead and discuss about the local scope. So what I mean by that is that, let's say I'm defining a function. Let's say I'm calling it as fun2 here. So instead of this function, I'm assigning, let's say num1. Instead of num1, I'm taking num2 here, and I am assigning 10 here. So I will just print num2 here. So after that, if I call this fun2 and if I execute this, this is got executed and we are getting 10 here. So what here I am doing is that I am initializing this number 2 with 20. I am just printing that, right? So now let's say if I access this num2 outside of this function, and I am accessing num2 outside of this function, so this num1 num2 is only restricted to this function, but still I am trying to access this num2. If I execute this, so we are getting error, name num2 is not defined. So though this num2 is defined and assigned with 10 inside of this function, but when we are trying to access this num2 outside of the function, we are getting an error, right? So that is what we are getting. So if you could carefully observe here, we are getting this 10 inside of this function through this print, but when it comes to outside of this print, we are getting error saying name num2 is not defined. So why is that? Is because this num2 is defined only within this function, right? Because of that reason, it is not getting accessed outside of the function. The reason is because whenever a block of code is executed, so the execution will come to this block whenever we are calling this fun2. So when the execution come to block of fun2, the initialization happening, right? So we are initializing num2 and we are printing that num2. So after once this block of code is completes its execution, so initially we are initializing memory for num2. So after this block completes its execution, the memory will be deallocated. So this num2 will be get deleted. Because of that reason, when we are trying to access this num2 outside of this function, we are not able to get that. That is the reason. The reason is because this num2 is only restricted and isolated for function 2. That is the reason we cannot access this num2 outside of the function. So here, when you carefully see, this num is defined outside of all the function. Because of that reason, this can be accessed to any function and any block. Because of that reason, we are accessing in fun1 and fun1 here. So even if I print this num here, so I am printing this number outside of all the functions. So after this calling of these functions, I am printing this. So even if I execute this, still we can able to get this 10. The reason is because this num can be accessed globally. So any block, any function for that matter, we can able to access this num because it is defined globally. Because of that reason, we can access this num anywhere that we wanted. But whereas this num2 is only defined within this block, because of that reason, we cannot able to access outside of the block. So outside of the block, which is this one, printing of num2. Let us understand this more clearly with the whiteboard. So here what I am trying to do is that here I will consider a global scope here. So initially we started discussing about global scope, right? So when we are defining some number here, this can be accessed across all the scopes. So after that we have defined a function, right? So we have defined two functions. So one function, assume this as a one function and assume this as a another function. This function is fun1 and this function is, let's say, fun2. So when we have this 10, this 10 can be accessed to this fun and this fun1. The reason is because this got access, this is defined globally. Because of that reason, this 10 can be accessed through this block and this block as well. So when we consider local scope, so when we are defining the number 10 only in this block, right? So only in this fun2. Because of that reason, this 10 is initialized only this fun1, only this function. Because of that reason, it cannot be accessed outside of the block. So this is only restricted within the block. That is the reason we cannot access this number outside of the block. The reason is because this 10 is initialized inside of a block, inside of a function. That is the reason we can only access that within the local scope, which means because of that reason, the variable is considered as local scope, only initialized in this block and deleted in this block itself. We cannot access directly outside of a function. So there is a way that we can access this variable outside of a function that we will discuss later of this video. For the time being, understand globally, when the variable is defined globally, we can access the variable across any blocks, across any functions. But when we are defining the variable in locally, we cannot access this variable globally, which means outside of the block. I will explain with one more case here. So here we are taking with fun2, right? So even if I take one more function, let's say I'm calling it as fun3, and in this fun3, even if I print num2, so what I'm trying to do is that we have this fun2, right? So in fun2 we have num2 and we are printing num2. So now I'm doing the same thing. I'm trying to print this num2 in the fun3. So now if I call this fun3 here and if I execute this, so still we are getting error inside of the fun3 here, because this num2 cannot be accessed outside of this function. This num2 is only restricted and only accessed within this function only. That is the reason we cannot access this number outside of the function. This is another function, right? That is the reason we cannot able to access this num2 outside of the function. So I hope you can able to understand, right? So what I am trying to say is that this num2 is only initialized in this function and only accessible inside of this function. That is the main focus of this local scope. This is locally defined and locally deleted within the block itself. By this, I hope you can able to understand that the variables which are defined inside of a function cannot be accessed outside of a function directly, but there is a way that we can access this variable which are defined inside of a function, but still we can able to access them outside of a function. So to access them, there is a keyword in Python which is nothing but global. So by using this global, we can make the local variables with a global scope. So let us go ahead and understand how this global works. So now we are defining this num2 inside of this function 2, right? So in order to make this num2 global, what we can do is that I will mention global and I will mention num2. So what I am trying to do here is that I wanted to make this num2 globally accessible. That is what I am mentioning here. I am mentioning num2 and I am mentioning keyword which is global, which means this num2 needs to be accessed globally. So now if I execute this, we can able to see 10, 10, 10, 10. The reason is because 110 is printing here inside of function 2 and another 10 is printing here inside of function 3 and another 10 is printing outside of all the functions at the end here, right? So why we can able to access this num2 globally even though this variable is defined inside of the function 2? The reason is because using this global keyword. So by using this global keyword, we can make the local variables to be accessible globally across of all the functions, across of everything. So that is the reason we can able to access this 10 outside of this function and inside of another function and outside of all the functions here. So I hope by this you can able to understand the local scope and the making the local variables to the global scope. So but there is a trick here. So now what I will be doing is that I will define this function 3. So I am taking this function 3 here and I will mention this function 3 before this function 2. So what I am trying to do is that I am mentioning this function 3 before this function 2 and also I will call this function. So what I am trying to do is that first I am trying to call this function 3. After that, I will call this function 2. So the execution will start with function 3 and function 3 will execute first and later function 2 will be executed. So now if I execute this, understand carefully, if I execute this, so we are getting the same result because this number 2 will be stored in the cache because we are using Jupyter Notebook, right? So now if I mention number 3 here, so I am taking number 3 in everywhere here. So here also I am taking number 3 and here also I am taking number 3. So now understand carefully, we are defining this number 3 inside of function 2 and printing this number 3, right? So but we are trying to access this number 3 before this initialization. So we are first accessing this function 3 and then we are trying to call this function 2. So let's see what happens. And if I execute this, you can see an error, name number 3 is not defined. The reason is because we are first calling this function 3 and later we are calling function 2. Because of that reason, we are getting this error. So why we are getting this error is because first we need to assign the variable. First we need to initialize the variable. Though we are using a global keyword and trying to make this number 3 global, but still we are not making this global. And before we try to make this variable global, before we are trying to do that, we are accessing this number 3, right? So first we will access this number 3, later we will access this, later we are initializing this number 3. Because of that reason we are getting an error, so which is nothing but name number 3 is not defined because we are accessing before assignment. So here only this variable will be initialized and assigned. So because before that we are trying to access this number 3, which is the result, we are getting error. So now instead of this number 3 calling, if I call number 3 after function 3, so I am trying to call this function 3 after function 2, and if I execute this, now you can able to see the result 10 10 10 10. So this is the one of the catch, this is the one of the edge case that we need to be very careful. We need to call this function, whichever the function we are trying to make the variables globally, then only after that one only we need to call the remaining function, we need to do the remaining process, right? So that is the one of the important aspect that we need to do, and we need to carefully code well. Carefully, we need to carefully write the code. If not, we will get this kind of an errors. So now I will try to show you one more case here with one more example. Let's say what I'm trying to do is that I will define a function, let's say function 4 here. So instead of this function, I will assign this num as 20 here. So I'm taking function 4, I will take number also 4 here. If I print number 4 here, and before this what I will try to do is that I will take number 4 in here as well. So I am taking number 4, and here what if you could carefully observe, I am taking number 4 outside of all the functions, which is nothing but global variable. So this number 4 can be considered as global variable, right? So after that, inside of this function also I am considering one more number 4 which will be considered, right? So now here what I will be doing is that I will mention this as 40. So outside of this number 4 is got 40, and inside of this number 4 which is got 20, right? So now if I execute this, we won't get anything. First we need to call this, right? So I will call this function 4 here, and if I execute this, we are getting 20 here. So let's say if I print number 4 outside of this function, right, if I execute this, we are getting 40. So by this what you can able to understand is that this local scope, so now we are defining this function, we are defining this number 4 inside of the function, right? Because of that reason, when we print this function, when we print this variable number 4 inside of this function, we will get 20, and this is only, this number 4 is only restricted to this function, right? Because of that reason we are getting 20 for the first time, and after that we are printing number 4. So now we are accessing global variable, not the local variable. The reason is because this number 4 is only restricted to this block only. If you wanted to make this number 4 globally, what we need to do, we need to mention global and we need to mention the variable. So now if I execute this, you can able to see we are getting 20 which is coming from this function, and we are getting another 20 which is coming from outside of this function. So let's say if I don't want to mention this number 4, and let's say if I wanted to, and I will execute first. So I am executing this, so you can able to understand carefully, we are printing this number 4 here, which is taking the value within the function, right? So which is nothing but this number 4. So can we take the global variable? So what I'm trying to say is that I wanted to access this number 4 inside of this function, though this number 4 is present. So what happens is that we are having this number 4, right? So I will do one more thing here. So here I am commenting this. So we don't have any number 4 initialization within this function, but if I execute this, we are getting 40 and 40. The reason is because this number 4 is accessing, this number 4 is getting the value from the global variable, this number 4 here. So now if I initialize this and if I execute this, we are getting number 4 which is nothing but 20. The reason is because this number 4 is initialized within this function, which is the reason we are accessing 20 here. So what I am trying to do is that I wanted to access number 4 which is nothing but this 40 here. So though we have this number 4 inside of this function, but still I wanted to access this number 4 which is 40. So in order to do that, we have a specific function which is nothing but globals. So I will explain this globals. So what these globals do is that it will get all the values which are defined outside of all the functions, which is nothing but global variables. It will access all the global variables. So now if I print this globals and if I execute this, you can able to see we are getting all the variables. These are all the global variables, and global everything is global, right? So that is what we are getting. These are the global things that we will discuss later. So for the time being, what I will be doing is that, so by this you can able to understand, by using these globals we can able to access all the global variables and everything. So here we are accessing everything, and this is actually a folder, right? So in this folder only I am working. So in simplest possible way here, if you come very beginning, so everything you need to know about Python in simplest possible way, that is what here. So like this, it was accessing all the global things. So variables, local scope, global scope, that is present here. So by this you can able to understand what these globals do is that it will access all the global things, everything that is defined globally. So now if I wanted to access this number 4 which is defined globally, what we can do is that this is a dictionary, right? So here this is a key and this is a value. So this is one key value pair and this is getting in terms of a dictionary. So in order to access this number 4, what we can do is that we can mention the name here. So which is nothing but number 4, which is a key, right? So the key is number 4, the value that we can able to get is 40. And if I execute this, you can able to see 40, 20 and 40. This 40 is initially coming from this globals number 4, and after that we are getting number 4 which is defined within this function, right? So after that when I print this number 4 which is outside of all the function, we are getting 40. So by this we can able to access the global variables, whatever the variables and everything that is defined globally we can able to access like this. So I hope you can able to understand how we can access and how we can access the global variables within the local scope, though we have another variable that is overriding existing one. So here we are overriding this number 4, right? So previously we have 40. By defining the same number 4 inside of the function, we were overriding with another value, but still we can able to access that value which is defined globally by using this number 4. I hope you can able to understand. So these are the some of the combination that we have discussed, local and global scope. Give me few moments, I will wrap up and I will summarize everything that what we have discussed. So we have initially started our discussion with a global scope, right? Whichever the variable, whichever the thing that is defined outside of all the blocks that can be accessed within any block. So we have discussed how we can access this global variable number 1 inside of this fun and fun 1, right? So apart from that we can able to access locally and globally, which is the global variable. So after that we have discussed how a specific variable defined locally and how we cannot access the variable outside of that function. So previously we have seen this number 3 is defined only this function too, and we cannot able to access this number 3 outside of this function, that we have seen previously. After that, in order to make this local variable to globally, we are using this global keyword in order to make the local scope to the global scope. So after that we have discussed when we are writing the same variable globally and locally, this local variable will override the existing global variable and we will get the result, we will get the access of local variable only. In order to get the global variable, we have a specific function which is nothing but globals. By using this we can able to access everything that is present globally, and this will return in terms of a dictionary. But if you wanted to specifically access a specific variable, we can use the key inside of this indexes. So by using that we can able to access global variables. So by this I hope you can able to understand the local scope and global scope and how to use the global scope and how to use the local scope. And if you wanted to override, if you wanted to make the local scope to global scope, we can discuss, we have seen and we have discussed it, right? So I hope you have understood all the concepts explained in this video, and I hope you have found this video interesting. If that is true, hit the like button. Like this, we will be discussing some more related functions in our coming videos. To stay updated with my latest videos, subscribe to this channel and turn on the notifications to all so that whenever I upload any video, you will get the notification. Thank you for watching this video. See you in the next one.